Excited to have you guys join us tonight. You all are about to get some amazing information from a great group of people, except we really like to help students just get the information they need, and we try to close the gap on access and equity to a college education. So we are really excited for what is gonna come next, and I'm gonna kick it to Alma, who will get the session started. So thanks for joining us.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Alma Raymer. I am the Associate Director for Enrollment and Institutional Relations at National Hispanic Institute near Austin, Texas. And I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, but wanted to announce for anybody who may need, we do have a couple of bilingual English and Spanish speakers between myself and the panelists this evening. So if anybody needs anything translated, please feel free to let us know.
Hi, I'm Jody Glassman. I'm the Director of University Admissions at Florida International University in Miami.
Hi, my name is Alice Dalbo, and I'm the Director of Post-Secondary Opportunity for Latinx Ed, which is a community-based organization in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Morano. I'm the College Bound Advisor at the Irma Rangel Young Women's Leadership School in Dallas, Texas.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Luis Franco. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of North Texas at Dallas. Buenas tardes.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start off with a pretty simple question for our panelists, and feel free to jump in as makes sense, given your different roles. Just want to start off with general advice that you all have for our current seniors who may be undocumented or DACA recipients themselves or come from mixed status families.
So I'll get started. So with all students, I just want everyone to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So the very first thing is to take a deep breath. This is a time, an unprecedented time that we're all going through. And there's a lot of ambiguity from all of us in your high schools, in the colleges that you're applying to. And we know that decisions are being made and things are happening at what seems at a very slow pace. But, you know, our primary focus is on you and on your health, on your happiness, on your education, and on successfully transitioning you from high school into whatever that next step is for you, whether it is a straight path into a four-year university or a community college or an apprenticeship program. We are here for you. And don't be afraid to contact us, to reach out, to ask us for help in the admissions office, to let us know what challenges you're facing so that we can work together to ensure that we're being your partner on this journey.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say, I tell my students, it's just Thursday. so it's just Thursday, and we're gonna do this a day, an hour at a time. And there is support out there for you. There are allies and activists fighting for you and standing right next to you. And some of us are on this call right now. So we want you to know that we're available to you as a resource, not just tonight, but in the days ahead. We got you.
Wonderful. So I'm going to switch over to kind of talking about, and we all had a chance to connect about this the other day, but general advice about the college search process for students who may be just starting to embark on that, maybe a little bit deeper into that process, and this has created some questions for them, as well as general advice regarding the financial aid process for when they arrive there, or for students who are currently going through reviewing financial aid awards.
Okay, I'll start. The first thing you need to do, if you are, well, really anywhere, if you're just starting your college search process, the first thing you need to do is to identify if you are living in an undocu-friendly state. And undocu-friendly means, is there support in your state for students who are undocumented? And there's a map that we have that we can share with you to let you know if there are policies, state policies, that mandate or control access to higher education, right? Because there's no guarantee in the federal law to higher ed, but thankfully there are many, many states that have policies on the books that support undocumented students in terms of college admission, and even some with financial aid from that particular state. So that would be the first thing to do, I think. And then find a trusted advisor. Somebody at your school, one of us, someone at one of the organizations that we'll recommend for you, that can be a good resource in terms of starting to think about what's important to you in a college, and basically to start your search in terms of what kind of experience you want to have, and to help you identify what undocu-friendly institutions are out there. I don't want to do all the talking, so I'm just going to share those two things.
I'm going to also give you another resource to piggyback on what Ann just said, which was absolutely perfect. And that is to look at some of the scholarship available sites that are available, like the dream.us, and those schools that are listed there. Those are what you used a term,
Undocu-friendly.
Undocu-friendly institutions. They are partners with the dream.us, which provides scholarship money, private scholarship money for students who are undocumented and DACA, under DACA status. There are other scholarship organizations that have specific scholarship funds available to you. So don't just look at the state fund, how a state funds, if you're looking at private institutions, or if you're looking at a 2-year institution, definitely check out some of those resources in order to help fund your education.
I'll add, I'm here in North Carolina, and we are not an undocu-friendly state in terms of having public institutions that are able to admit and fund undocumented students. So here in North Carolina, as in about a dozen other states, undocumented students are required to pay out-of-state tuition. So the public institutions that many of your peers who have US citizenship might be looking at as affordable alternatives are not actually affordable alternatives for students in locked out states where public institutions charge out-of-state tuition. And so that means that one of the criteria in your college search is going to really be looking at especially private colleges that can award their own financial aid dollars however they wish to award it, and can offer financial aid for undocumented students. So here in North Carolina, a lot of our students are very excited about our state universities, but our undocumented students will end up at many of our much smaller colleges that have made commitments to supporting a thriving undocumented student community. And they are able to provide financial aid so that it's actually less expensive to go to a private institution with those scholarship dollars. And I think also, just to be realistic for students who might be in a locked out state and probably across the board, is unlike some of your peers, you may have to consider out-of-state institutions more. Jody had mentioned the Dream.US scholarship, which is a great, amazing resource for students in North Carolina to apply to. But all of the partner institutions are outside of North Carolina. So that requires a conversation with family members about what the college college going process might look like. And I always encourage my students to just not narrow it down too quickly. While you might have peers that are trying to narrow it down, your list might actually grow, and you might have to think more broadly about some criteria in order to make sure that you're not missing any opportunities.
What I would add, just from being in Texas and being from a public institution and an institution that is one of the Dream US colleges, is I definitely would reinforce the point that Anne made about finding that advocate or that friend, that ally that you can rely on. A lot of the admission officers, a lot of your high school counselors, a lot of the people that perhaps you think you're already comfortable, obviously talking about your status and talking about your hesitations and your fear about going to college. Look, I know that going to college is already perhaps a scary process, and it's overwhelming in general for most students and families. And when you throw in that layer of considering what are your options, how do I pay for this with limited resources, I think sometimes students can maybe perhaps feel like they don't have a lot of options, that sometimes they're told your only option is to go to community college or to, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think definitely, like I said, don't narrow that down immediately, and just have some good conversations with people that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, and do some of that research, include some of that, just like you're looking for other things with regards to your college search about support services, tutoring, student life, then make part of that process to include what it is that that college does for undocumented students, and then also understanding, depending on your state and where you are, the differences between some of these terms that we're throwing out, such as like if a student is documented or has DACA versus just doesn't have access or is not eligible to get DACA, but in their state, they might be eligible for in-state tuition, or they might live in that undocu-friendly state that has some policies that even if you don't have DACA, you can still go to college and have some in-state tuition or institutional scholarships. So again, you just kind of have to learn a little bit about that and kind of educate yourself with some of those terms and resources. And when you don't understand something, then definitely ask and reach out. And I think part of that is, as you're having those conversations with the institutions, then you'll begin to just understand if they're not helpful, knowledgeable, if they are not willing to help you. It's kind of part of that process, right? And you realize, hey, like, they don't seem very willing to help me or answer the questions or be able to be helpful about that. So maybe that's part of the factors you consider. And I think, looking at what was referred to as a lockdown state, usually it just means that that's those states where a student maybe is not eligible because of law or certain policies in the state to be able to go to college. Some states actually make it not necessarily legal, but I mean, you can kind of interpret it that way, for there not be an option for you to go to school. So again, it's just being able to understand kind of what that means, you're being locked out of pretty much having a higher education.
Thank you for that, Luis. And very quickly, we'll share this out in an email as a resource after, but I want to show very quickly the map that was referenced earlier so that folks can get a sense of, and it's going to be small, so I apologize in advance, but get a sense of what some of the different levels of access might be in your home state. So hang with me, Rachel, real quick. So you're going to see color codes, basically, that represent whether or not students, there are equity laws in terms of tuition in your home state or not. This is something we'll share out. I want to make sure that Rachel was seen, so I'm going to give her a moment. And thank you for answering that question, Luis. While while we have a moment, I wanted to, y'all have, a couple of you have mentioned already identifying trustworthy or knowledgeable folks on campuses. And I want you to speak a little bit to how could a student identify the right person or a trustworthy person on a campus who would serve as a good resource for them.
I mean, I think that for us, and I can only speak about my institution, when our student lands on our admissions page or even just our homepage, we actually have a button that says DACA Student Resources. Not a lot of institutions have that maybe boldness or ability to kind of put that really up front. But we wanted just to not hide that and make sure that students were really comfortable seeing that. And then on that, it gives you some ability to be able to contact with some resources on campus. If that institution has either, some of them call it a Dreamer Network or Undocumented Student Association or a Dreamer student group. And so again, a lot of times those who are advisors to that will work in student life, in student access and success, campus life, your student affairs people, counseling office are usually going to have some people that may be a resource. Some campuses actually have somebody who's part of their title, if not their title, is a undocumented student resource officer or advisor or admission person that's really well identified. Some university campuses have a resource center, whether it's part of their multicultural student center or their counseling office that has an individual, again, that's been identified or asked to kind of serve undocumented students and be part of that. And then again, a lot of those organizations that we'll share out have those different centers or different organizations. I think also just right off the bat, as you work with your high school counselor, your college advisor, whoever is the resource you have right off the bat, is who can help you communicate with the admissions office. And I think admission offices in general at large are usually probably the most immediate contact that students will have to start building that relationship, and then just ask. And if your admission counselor or your recruiter, whatever term that school uses, should be able to point you if they don't say that, hey, I'm the one that you can interact with and ask that, and let me get you connected as the admission representative, then they could also point you to those places on campus that might be a resource as well.
And it's my habit to kind of be obnoxious, so I apologize. But I also think if you're on a high school campus, on a secondary school campus, very clearly in our building at least, and I'm very fortunate that we're able to do this, but we post Dreamer friendly signs, immigrant students celebrated and welcomed here, all over our building, especially for those staff members who are definitely safe spaces and comfortable, not only giving information, but providing support and then directing students to more appropriate places if need be. So anyway, look for those signs. Sometimes they're subtle, but they're out there.
Awesome. Thank you both. So I kind of want to make a segue based on something that you mentioned, Luis, which are the type of, maybe not even just folks kind of within the administration at an institution, but some of the more subtle ways that a student might be able to get a sense for how a particular student or community of students might be viewed on a given campus through student organizations. I know that Jody, at your institution, there may be different kinds of student organizations, or Alice or Anne, if you've worked with students who have gone to campuses that have had a really strong presence, if you could speak to that.
So FIU, the I is international. So we definitely run the gambit of student organizations, as well as having an office of multicultural services and inclusivity on our campus. It's woven throughout the university culture and the university community from the moment you step on campus. you can tell from cultural hints. So we are in Miami. The campus has a ventanita. So if you're from Miami and you've been to Miami, you know that the ventanita is an important symbol of the Miami community and Miami culture, of not only a place to get a cafecito, but a place where people gather. And it doesn't matter who you are, your status, your cultural background, your economic status, everyone at a ventanita is the same. You're there for the conversation, the coffee, and to be as one, as a community, and that's what it symbolizes. So we actually have 2 ventanitas on campus. We also bring around the coffee at 3:05. So we are not only within our student organizations and the students on campus, but within the campus culture in and of itself, we include cultural norms from what students bring to us and what the faculty and staff bring to the campus. I hope that makes sense. So you will find that it's a very open and accepting type of campus where when you come on campus, these are just things that just happen. It's very natural for these type of things to happen.
Some of the student groups that I know have been supportive for undocumented students once they arrive at college are groups like a student chapter of Define American. Define American is a national advocacy group that works on immigrant justice, specifically with undocumented immigrants. And there are many student chapters of that group. That's the kind of club you might look for. Of course, being undocumented is not required to be a part of that organization, right? So this is a place where you're going to find allies in the fight, people who care about the rights and dignity of undocumented folks. And I think you'll find on campuses that are going to embrace and celebrate the undocumented student experience, you're going to find immigrant rights organizations, maybe embedded in other social justice movements on the campus. I think learning about the social justice culture of a place, I think, says something about their openness to diverse experiences. And I think, for example, when the DACA rescission happened, one of the things I was looking for is, what college presidents were making statements about saying that DACA should not be rescinded, which organizations and colleges were in support of continuing DACA. And with DACA in front of the Supreme Court now, there's certainly other sort of news stories to look for, and who is speaking out in favor of immigrant rights during this time. And I think right now in the particular time we're in, looking at sort of how a school treats its worker community, its essential workers, the community in the city in which they are, or the town in which they are, I think says a lot about the ethos of a place. And so I think those are sort of like side doors into understanding what, if an undocumented identity would be valued at that place, because I think it's tied into fights for justice in lots of ways.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Alice. Before we move on, there's a very specific question for Jody regarding FIU. I'm going to sort of summarize it just so that everyone has access to the question. This is for someone who works with students at a public high school in Miami, and they have specific questions about a student who is accepted into MDC honors and FIU Engineering, so where Jody works. The student is undocumented and has applied to Dream.us scholarship for that institution. And the question is pertaining to if the student does not receive the Dream.us scholarship, and sort of what that process will look like for that student.
Sure. So Miami-Dade College, Honors College, is an excellent program. And Miami-Dade College also offers the Dream.us. So it's a natural partner with us. And for those of you who work with Dream.us or know about it, Gabby Pacheco, who was at the time a young woman who marched to Washington, is a graduate of Miami-Dade. And so she is also a great friend of ours and of FIU. And so we came on board together, Miami-Dade and FIU. So we actually see a lot of students taking this path, doing the 2-year scholarship at Miami-Dade through the Honors College, which then actually guarantees a student a spot in the Honors College at FIU. And then they can apply for the transfer Dream.us scholarship with FIU. So it's almost a seamless transition for a student to apply for the 2+2. So there is a 2+2 option for that student should, I believe it was a young lady, should go to Miami-Dade first, do the 2 years there. We have advisors, actually, academic advisors at Miami-Dade who will keep her on track for the engineering prerequisite so she can stay on track for engineering, do her 2 years, apply for the transfer scholarship, and then seamless transition to FIU, Honors College, and engineering.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jody. We have another question from someone who is asking if there are not any specific groups who work to support and or make undocumented students feel safe on a particular campus. What advice do you all have for students who are seeking to start their own club or organization? And what conversations should such a student or group of students have with professors or administration on a particular campus?
Sure, I can speak to that. So I think if there's not a group, that's something that as college staff, we definitely encourage, and that's part of what you bring to our campus, right? So that's part of your leadership, who you are, your advocacy, your desire for social justice, or to collaborate with other people on campus. So yes, if you step foot on campus, I think you definitely want to reach out. Most universities are going to have a process for which students start an organization, typically securing a certain number of other students who are like-minded, who would also support you and be interested in joining your organization. That size or that number depends on institution. Some of them want 3, some of them want 10. And then also talking through the student life office or the student activities office, who usually is going to help you through that process to formally start an organization and come up with a constitution, a charter, kind of who gets to become a member. And then usually as part of that process, then you'll also get an advisor or a sponsor who can be a staff member or a faculty member, who can work with you to make sure that you're supported as an organization on campus and have access to the resources that other organizations on campus have. So I think if you're looking to start any type of club, but particularly a club that serves undocumented students, I think that student activities office will be a great resource in explaining that process, and then also letting you know, again, sort of we've talked about before, what that campus environment is, and if that's an organization that's going to be definitely supported, celebrated, that's going to be, kind of cheered on, or if it's something that, not that it wouldn't be allowed to have, but that maybe will face some other challenges of different types, just like other organizations that begin to want to be started on a college campus might face.
Okay, perfect. And there is another question, which I'm going to give us a couple more minutes to get to, just because we have until 7:45. But I do want to kind of make a general PSA that none of us are immigration attorneys. And so although I know that all of us wish we had all of the answers to specific questions about eligibility for DACA or lack of eligibility, we do have resources that we can share, but we probably cannot answer any specific questions, and that's unfortunate. But we want to make sure that folks get the correct information so that folks can make the correct decisions for themselves and their families. So I know that we talked a little bit the other day when we all connected about getting to this last question that's currently in the Q&A about how students who may be undocumented or who are documented or who are recipients of DACA should approach the college search process. So if y'all would speak a little bit to whether or not maybe a student should share personal information about their status on social media or in their application. I think that's an important conversation for us to share with our students.
So so with the Florida law, actually, so there's something called FERPA, which protects all education records. So it protects your education records. However, in the state of Florida, it protects applicants. So not every state protects applications. So we here in the state of Florida protect applicants. So we do want to know, and we will keep that information private. It is protected information for you. And the reason why we want to know is because there is a waiver. There is a state waiver that gives you in-state tuition. And because we have the Dream.US scholarship and we want to make sure you're getting the right information, we're also partners with NHI and some other organizations that do also offer scholarships. So we want to make sure that that information is getting to the students who need it. So that would be why we'd want to know. But again, it is protected information in Florida. So do look at that when you're making that determination. And also, just to piggyback on what Alma just said, FIU does have a legal clinic on campus for our students. And it is available through our law school. So we're really excited and very proud of that. So we hope that students, and we want students to feel comfortable and nurtured when they come to campus. And our, again, primary goal is for you to succeed.
Quick follow-up question, Jody. Somebody asked in the Q&A if for the state of Florida, is that information protected both at public and private universities?
FERPA is a federal, and you know what, I don't know the answer, but if we could get that person's information, let me look into it and I will respond. And then I believe that Jen and Dan said they had everybody's information. They could send it out as follow-up for everybody else. I think it is, but let me find out and I'll send to them.
My inclination is to assume that within the state of Florida, because it's a state law.
Yeah. That would be mine too. Florida. Yeah, it's not a regulation for just the Board of Governors. So that would be my inclination too, that it's a state law and written into statute, which would make it a state law. So yeah.
I just wanted to add something about approaching, it's such a weird switch, I imagine, to have had this piece of your identity that you may not always be comfortable sharing, depending on what kind of community you're in your school. You worried about sharing it with government institutions and so forth. And so I think we all realize that it can be kind of a soul-searching process to be forthright about your status. But the information on an application about your citizenship needs to be accurate. That does not mean that in your essay or an interview or those types of things, that needs to be your central identity, unless that's what you choose for it to be. You have the agency to decide when and how you share that information. I know a lot of the students I've worked with feel it's really important to share that part of their story, but not all of them want to. And I also want to say something just about for students who come from mixed status families and approaching this kind of information. A number of the students I work with do have US citizenship and do qualify for federal aid and fill out the FAFSA, but their parents are undocumented. And that's where information sharing also gets very stressful for students, because they're worried, the parents are worried about sharing that information. They're worried about calling a financial aid office and explaining a parent's unusual work situation, for example. And that's where, going back to Anne's original point about finding a trusted advisor, those are the kinds of things that a counselor, a teacher, a community advocate, someone in admissions that you've met that you love because you met Jody or you met Luis, who can help you navigate some of those pathways. There's a lot of times where I can call a financial aid office and say, I'm not going to tell you who I'm talking about, but this is the situation. How are we navigating this paperwork? And so even if you have citizenship, if you're worried about the mixed status of your family, that's another place where an advocate can really help do some information gathering, so that you don't feel that you're putting you or your family's information in any kind of compromising position.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Alice. Another piece that we touched on the other day that I think might be of interest is, I know that some of you all have thoughts or considerations you might want to put forward in terms of the type of majors that a student might choose to study or not due to their status, or coming from a mixed status family, whatever it might be, and or types of career paths.
Yeah, so in your search, we certainly want to encourage you to follow your ganas, your dreams, your goals, right? Your passions. But the reality is that there are some programs or some future professions that you might be looking at that require having a license, that at this point you may not be able to sit for that licensing exam because of your status. But that doesn't mean you can't get involved in that field of study. Definitely working with an advisor to help you identify, for instance, in some states, you might not be able to sit for the licensing exam for nursing to become a registered nurse, but you're very interested in healthcare. So working with an advisor who can, there's a lot of things you can do in healthcare, in public health and other fields related to it. So working with an advisor who can help put you on a pathway in a related area is something that I always tell my students to look for. Anybody else want to jump in on that? My message is, don't get discouraged. If you have that interest, go for it, but recognize there may be a limitation, and also that's dynamic and that's changing, in different fields that is happening. So don't get too discouraged, but I feel like someone else should probably jump on that too.
Sure. I mean, I think exactly, you hit it on the nail. I think it's just communicating, being forthcoming about that, and then just realizing that there are some things that, right now we're obviously talking about the college application process and kind of how can I go to college being an undocumented student? Is that an obstacle? Is that something that I can still do? And absolutely, hopefully you have at least gotten that message. But I think as you move forward in that search process, and then as you start being a college student and looking at your major, looking at your plans after graduation, jobs, internships, student teaching, clinicals, whatever it is that's related to what you want to study, what are some things that are going to come up that, how will you have a plan around that, right? And some of those have an implication, meaning, well, if I can't have a licensure exam, or if I can't sit to pass a background check, or I can't have a document that I'm going to need to complete a requirement or part of my major or my academic program, what are the alternatives? Or does that mean that I can't do something specific, but maybe there's some alternative, or there's something else within that field or within that major? So again, I think it's just, the whole point is just to keep that in mind. I think sometimes, whether it's an advisor or a high school counselor or a college career readiness person, whatever, might not necessarily always think about that. And I think too, as a student, if you can kind of say, hey, what about this? Or what does it take to be this major or this profession? And will anything in that be an obstacle or, challenge based on my situation?
That's awesome. You also just reminded me that sometimes you might run into a situation in class where the professor or even your teacher now in high school might have a requirement put in place that you won't be able to satisfy because of your status. Things like everybody needs to complete the FAFSA, right, in order to graduate. And I know that's a new law for us going forward in Texas, but because we have laws on the state books, we have equity laws here that support undocumented students, that laws actually, they can also apply for our state financial aid and complete that form. And so that will satisfy the requirement. And then there's also a way that students can opt out. But anyway, but there may be other things that your school, or as you move forward into college, a professor's put into place. And hopefully you've identified a mentor or an advocate that can help you have that conversation with that professor or person, but also know that you have the skill set and the right, and Alice said agency, which is one of my favorite words, to say to that person, can we talk about that assignment or that requirement? I certainly would love to participate, but I need an alternate way to go about that because of, and you can be somebody that educates that professor, because most of the time, if you're on a campus that is supportive, it's not that that professor doesn't want to have your back or support you or have you participate. They just don't know. Most of us are still fairly ignorant about the rules that, or expectations we put in place that may keep people from participating. So I know that several of my students have been very successful with that in college, in programs that may seem like they're locked out to them, but they've been able to complete alternate assignments or experiences that still satisfied the coursework expectations, but didn't put them in jeopardy in situations where they would be at risk. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's awesome. Thanks, Anne. And just for anybody who's watching, we have about 2 minutes left in case there are any additional questions. Again, we have a huge amount of resources that we intend to share with everybody who has attended or who registered via email after this has concluded. So some of the scholarships that were referenced, the map will be in there, lots of all kinds of resources in terms of some of these questions we didn't get to specifically about status and breakdown of status. I do know that one other piece that we touched on was as relates to the current COVID-19 situation and wanting to share information about how anybody can go to a community testing site regardless of status. So know that. And I know that somebody had, they know a little bit more than I do about stimulus or other financial relief and how that could affect DACA and other statuses, if someone can speak to that.
I don't know. I don't consider myself an expert, but I know that when we were talking about the subject, I know that there's a lot of questions right now about people saying, what am I eligible for? And on various fronts, obviously, in general, people feel like having an undocumented status or, being in any other type of immigration process, perhaps, with other things that we've heard about, sort of like the public charge, meaning if I'm applying to become a citizen or a resident, is that going to be stopped or challenged in some way or hurt my chances because I went and got a service or a benefit from the government, right? And so I know that those are questions that people might have. Specifically, right now, college campuses, through part of the funding that the stimulus had, received some, through the CARE Act, received some funding for either emergency funding for students, additional financial aid, et cetera. So I think I would just encourage students definitely to go to their financial aid office or their campuses themselves, because I think different campuses or their state, or depending on what those resources are and how those are awarded and that criteria might be different. So I think that rather than us trying to assume or guess what those are, I think I would just encourage that student, if you're in the college application process right now, then obviously make that part of your discussion with the admissions office, with the financial aid office. If you are a current college student or a current college student, might have a question about that, I know on our campus and from our financial aid office, because I asked that question kind of after we met, and they said that from their peer group, and even they were going to sit in and we can share that as part of the resources in a webinar themselves tomorrow, because most of them, since it was very loosely defined and it narrowed down to a student attending the university, they felt that it actually opened it up to students who weren't even U.S. citizens and U.S. residents. And on some institutions that were part of their call, they said that they were actually even considering awarding some of those resources to international students. So I think it's just going to be a lot of kind of legal interpretation and working with the different powers that be within the college campus or the system, the state, as far as getting clarification from the federal government as far as who has access to some of those resources. I think one of the things that was clear was some of those resources not being counted as financial aid or being considered financial aid themselves, which has other implications, that probably we can dive into in this webinar. But I think just for students to understand that if they were receiving some of those funds, it wouldn't necessarily be accounted for or considered as sort of additional income or impact their financial aid. So I think I would just encourage students to definitely reach out to their financial aid offices. And on that same topic, I think another thing is we have to acknowledge that a lot of families are having their situations change, right? Not only what it was 3 months ago, but the financial aid process, for whatever your thoughts are on it, obviously uses something called prior, which means that they look at your tax history and your income and your records from previous years to be able to estimate and kind of project your financial aid. And so that might be very different for families, especially given the situation. People might have lost income, lost jobs, be unemployed now. So again, from our financial aid office, the message has been for students to definitely reach out once they have their award and say, hey, there's a special circumstance, there's a process put in place in financial aid offices where those financial aid representatives, those financial aid professionals have the ability to use their professional judgment to say, hey, we do need to consider this. And while their 2018, 2019, taxes, that situation was different, their current April 2020, and then particularly when they're going to go to school in the fall, is different. So we just want to make sure the students know that they can reach out and do that. I know a lot of times students are hesitant to do that, or universities assume that students will reach out, and we just have to do a better job in making sure that the groups that need to raise that concern sometimes are the ones that don't know that they can, and they have that option to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luis. And the folks who are listening are probably already aware, but beyond college campuses, there are legal clinics to assist with answering specific questions as relate to you or your family or a family member in lots of cities across the United States. I think we have a resource in the folder, but if we don't, we will share one in terms of how to locate one, how to find one. Anna's nodding, so yes, there is one in that folder we'll be sharing. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I can add to just real quick, I know in the resources that we'll have, because I know that a lot of people, when they participate in a webinar, are interested on DACA and undocumented students. It never fails that there's questions about the current status and what's happening with DACA and the federal and the DREAM Act and things like that. And like you mentioned, we're not attorneys or immigration, lawyers. But I think in the resources that we have, there's several organizations who have dedicated themselves and their organization's purpose to constantly be plugged into that. So I would suggest encourage whoever is listening, whether they're an advisor, a college person, a high school counselor, college readiness folk, a student, parent, to just check those organizations out. A lot of them obviously have multiple social media channels. You can sign up for text alerts. You can just visit their websites and then plug in and hear from those. And some of those organizations are actual legal defense organizations or composed of lawyers who watch kind of what the government's doing, what the law is doing, and can provide very specific updates in general, just so that people know kind of how to be guided, and definitely reach out to those clinics that you usually might see about how to renew your DACA or anything like that. So that way you know what you still have access to and your rights, and then obviously just kind of be plugged in. The biggest thing is just, again, getting that information from those reliable sources.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luis. And thank you Jody, Alice, Anne, and all of Accept for having us, for hosting the webinar. Thank you, StriveScan. I do believe that we'll have the ability to answer follow-up questions kind of on a one-on-one basis. So there is that opportunity, and we'll be sharing out those resources with everyone very shortly.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alma. And just wanted to let everyone know in the audience that after you close the window, you'll get a 4-question quick survey. So if you could fill it out, we'd greatly appreciate your feedback. And then I mentioned at the beginning that we have sessions next week. We will also be extending those sessions through May 8th, where you have the opportunity to speak with individual colleges, so they have more time on the floor. So we hope to see you there. Other than that, thank you so much, everyone, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.